Hello everyone. The next topic which we will be studying is about the transport of gases during the process of respiration. So gases, the main focus of the gases will be the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, because in the process of respiration there is an inhalation of the oxygen gas and the exhalation of the carbon dioxide gas. So the transport of gases during the process of the respiration, so we will be discussing how the transport of gases takes place. So let's start with the first slide, that is the introduction. So the function of the respiration is to provide oxygen for use by the body cells during the cellular respiration and to eliminate the carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular respiration from the body. So carbon dioxide, which is considered as a waste product of the cellular respiration. So in order for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide to occur, both the gases must be transported between the external and the internal respiration sites. So there need to be an exchange of gases, and further both the gases are transported between the external and the internal respiration sites. Now, although carbon dioxide is more soluble than oxygen in blood, both the gases, they require a specialized transport system for the majority of the gas molecules to move between the lungs and the other tissues. So our main focus in this will be the oxygen transport and the carbon dioxide transport. So these are the two types of transport which we will be discussing in detail. So first we will be talking about is the about the oxygen transport in case of the respiration. Now, oxygen transport. So the oxygen, as we know, it does not dissolve in water. Only 1.5% of the inhaled oxygen is dissolved in the blood plasma, which is mostly water. So blood plasma, which is mostly water, only 1.5% of the inhaled oxygen gets dissolved. And 98.5% of the blood oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, which is in RBCs. So each 100 ml of oxygenated blood contains the equivalent of 20 ml of gaseous oxygen. So what is hemoglobin here? So hemoglobin is a tetrameric, allosteric and conjugated protein. So it is a protein which has a subunit which contains the heme prosthetic group. So what is heme? Heme is an iron containing derivative. Hemoglobin, it is present in all the vertebrates and in many invertebrates also. Many arthropods, mollusks, etc. So a variety of hemoglobin molecules are produced in humans and all are tetramers. So when one molecule of hemoglobin binds to 4 molecules of oxygen, 1 per heme, oxygen and hemoglobin, they bind in an easily reversible reaction which is called as oxyhemoglobin. So the reaction between the hemoglobin and the oxygen is an oxygenation, not an oxidation. So it is an oxygenation reaction, not an oxidation reaction. So iron, that is in Fe2 plus state, binds oxygen molecules reversibly, and in the state of Fe3 plus it does not bind to the oxygen. So the one of the most important factor that determines how much oxygen binds to hemoglobin is the partial pressure of oxygen. The higher the partial pressure of oxygen, the more oxygen will combine with the hemoglobin, and when deoxyhemoglobin is converted to oxyhemoglobin, the oxyhemoglobin is fully saturated when hemoglobin consists of a mixture of oxyhemoglobin. So here is a graph which is representing the relation between the percent saturation of the hemoglobin in the oxygen of the hemoglobin and is illustrated in the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So this is a plot of percentage oxygen saturation of hemoglobin versus the partial pressure of oxygen for hemoglobin, and it is an S shape or a sigmoidal graph. So it is a S shape graph. So this is a partial pressure of oxygen and this is a hemoglobin. So this is known as the oxygen dissociation curve. This is a S curve. Now, what are the factors that affect the hemoglobin's affinity for the oxygen? The factors will include the pH, the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide, and BPG, that is 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So now we will talk about is the pH first. Now, although the partial pressure of oxygen is the most important factor that determines the percent of oxygen saturation of hemoglobin, and there are several factors that influence the affinity with which hemoglobin binds to the oxygen. So one of the factor that affect the hemoglobin's affinity is the pH. So lowering the pH, if we lower down the pH, it causes the oxygen affinity of the hemoglobin to decrease and shift the curve to the right. So as you can see in the graph as well, that was being represented in the previous slide. So if this is a PO2, that is the oxygen partial pressure, and this is the hemoglobin, percentage hemoglobin, then this was a S-shaped curve. This was at the pH 7.2, and here if we do this like this, then here it will be at pH 7.4. So here the graph will shift to the right. Now there is a Bohr effect which is explained here. So Bohr effect is the effect of pH of the oxygen affinity of hemoglobin. So this is known as the Bohr effect. So under low pH condition, the hydrogen ions bind to the globin in hemoglobin and alter its structure slightly, decreasing its oxygen binding affinity. So by contrast, there is an elevated pH increase, that is the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen, and shifts the oxygen dissociation curve towards the left. So this is known as the pH factor. Now the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide, as we know, it also binds to the hemoglobin. As the carbon dioxide enters the blood, much of it is temporarily converted to carbonic acid, which is a reaction which is catalyzed by an enzyme in red blood cells called the carbonyl amylase andrase. So this is an enzyme catalyzed in the RBCs. So the carbonic acid thus formed in red blood cells and dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. So the H plus concentration increases and the pH will decrease. So it causes a decrease in the affinity of the hemoglobin for oxygen, and the oxygen dissociation curve will shift towards the right. So if we want to conclude this, it concludes that there is an increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide which produces a more acidic environment, which helps in the release of oxygen from the hemoglobin. So this is about the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. Next we will talk about is the BPG, that is the 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate. It is a highly charged anion. In deoxygenated state, there is a beta globin chains of hemoglobin that binds to one molecule of BPG. What it does, it reduces the affinity of oxygen. It reduces the oxygen affinity of the hemoglobin and shifts the entire oxygen dissociation curve to the right. So it will shift the entire dissociation curve towards the right. It exerts its effect on oxygen affinity of hemoglobin by binding to deoxyhemoglobin but not to oxyhemoglobin. So the greater the level of BPG, the more oxygen is unloaded from the hemoglobin. So this was about the BPG. So next we will talk about is the carbon dioxide transport. So when the arterial blood flows through the tissue capillaries, there is a carbon dioxide which diffuses down its partial pressure gradient from the tissue cells into the blood. So the carbon dioxide transport has been further divided into three parts or three ways, that is as a dissolved carbon dioxide, as carbamino compound, and as a bicarbonate ions. So we will be discussing each of these in detail, that as a dissolved carbon dioxide what is happening, as a carbamino compound, and as a bicarbonate compound. So first we will discuss is as dissolved carbon dioxide. So about 7% of the carbon dioxide is dissolved in the blood plasma. 7% is being dissolved. So the amount of carbon dioxide that is physically dissolved in the blood depends on the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. Because carbon dioxide is more soluble than oxygen in plasma water, a greater proportion of the total carbon dioxide than of oxygen in the blood is physically dissolved. So this is about the dissolved carbon dioxide. Next is as a carbamino compound. So about 23% of the carbon dioxide combines with the globin proteins of hemoglobin present in the RBCs of the blood to form the carboamino compounds. So the carbon dioxide that is binding the sites are the terminal amino acids in the 2 alpha and the 2 beta globin chains. And hemoglobin that has bound to the carbon dioxide is called the carboamino hemoglobin, that is HbCO2. So this is the carboamino compound. Next, as a bicarbonate ion. So the greatest percentage of carbon dioxide is being transported as a bicarbonate ion. So what is the greatest percentage? It is around 70%. So it is around 70% that is being transported to the bicarbonate ions. So some of the dissolved carbon dioxide reacts with water and they form the carbonic acid, which immediately breaks down to bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. So the reaction here is very slow in plasma and it is very fast in case of the RBCs because of the presence of an enzyme which is the carbonic amide andrase. So this enzyme catalyzes the formation of carbonic acid and dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus. So the reversible combination of the carbon dioxide with water in the RBCs under the influence of carbonic anhydrase, that is the enzyme, accounts for about 70% of the carbon dioxide transported from the tissues to the lungs. So this was about the as a bicarbonate ions. So some bicarbonate ions they move out into the blood plasma as well because down its concentration gradient. In exchange, the chloride ions they move from the plasma to the RBCs and there is an exchange of negative ions which maintains the electrical balance between the blood plasma and the RBC cytosol, which is known as the chloride shift. So that is known as the chloride shift. So these are some of the references. Thank you.